Hello, this video is on atheism, Stoic philosophy, hedonist philosophy, cynic philosophy and skepticism. There's a lot of subjects to cover. It might be a springboard for other videos, who knows. I've been reading this book by Marcus Aurelius, and I've mentioned it in some other videos as well. It's called The Meditations, and it's on Stoic philosophy. Now, strictly speaking, is this religious or is it philosophy? Well, I'm agnostic, and sometimes I think I'm an atheist. I'm not quite sure, you know. But as I saw this vid about the Matrix, and it talks a lot about the philosophy of the Matrix and the Logos. So this vid is really owed to those people who put that vid up. What is Stoic philosophy? Well, we often describe somebody as being a Stoic, somebody who's tough, somebody who's not always towards a man, but to have that sort of forbearing of manliness. Now, let me give you some examples of how Marcus Aurelius lived his life. When people plotted against him, he didn't kill all of the plotters because he was a Roman emperor, and he had infinite amounts of power. He could, probably more than anybody in history at that point, and he could have, if he wished to, kill everyone in the Roman Empire. He could have had sexual relations with anybody he wished under any circumstances, but he didn't. He was a good man. He used Stoic philosophy as a way to give himself self-discipline. So he lived as a poor man, although he was emperor. He gave away all his furniture and all of his mansions when Rome burnt down in a fire. As this is quite different to how the other Roman emperors were, and this was Stoic philosophy. He forbeared any problems. He didn't bother other people, and he didn't expect things to go well for himself. This is kind of the melancholy aspect of it. But this discipline in living came from what's now used as a term of excess, hedonism. This is the philosophy of that you just had just enough to give yourself pleasure. Of course, people have different amounts of pleasure, so that for you might see inequality in hedonism rather than the equality of Stoicism, because Stoicism was going towards one particular idea of living equally, if you like. Perhaps I'm putting that on because I'm a modern person with thinking in the modern terms, but it seems like that from reading his book Meditations, Marcus Aurelius' book Meditations. Now, the hedonists, for instance, if you would just have that sort of tuna steak, just enough, just a little bit of chili, just enough to give themselves pleasure. So a lot of it was denying themselves material things to give themselves a philosophical happiness, because this is the denial of spirituality and the denial of religion. It was living a philosophical life rather than a life based on faith. This leads me to the cynics. Now, the cynics believed that nothing could be measured except what was experienced, and that sort of really sums up their philosophy quite quickly. Therefore, this is quite an inward-looking philosophy. This is why the cynics weren't so keen on the idea of the Logos. The Stoics, and to a certain extent the hedonists, believed in this idea of a Logos. This was a sort of not fixed series of events that would happen through a life. You had certain will, but only through certain fixed parameters, if you like. In a sense, it was a kind of plastic way of seeing the world. The Logos was plastic. It would change to the different wills of the people involved, but it always tried to set towards some form of equality. Yet Stoic philosophy also didn't think that if you were born a slave you should complain that you were a slave, or you were born an emperor that you should complain that you were an emperor. It said that you should try and do the best with what you were given and try and reach that sort of medium between where everything was, where it wasn't about, as the hedonists would say, the pleasure of that, but to simply to be good. And Marcus Aurelius consistently did good things. Now, what would we call the skeptics, or the skeptics was similar to the cynics, and I'll just describe the skeptics and the contrarians in the modernist view, because I haven't read enough on the skeptics and contrarians of ancient Rome and Greece to talk about it in great detail. So I'd say a skeptic is somebody who really analyses something rather than taking it on faith. But a contrarian is often somebody who thinks of themselves as logical. I'm talking in this way of Christopher Hitchens, but yet Christopher Hitchens is also very ideological, and often you get this amazing thing of different socialists in the Spanish Civil War who took completely opposite opinions to one another because their ideology, simply because their ideology was different, they took different opinions, rather though and fought each other, even though the others who they made alliances with were of much difference to them than to the other socialists. It's very, very strange. But that sort of contrarianism in action. But generally, contrarianism is when you take a different opinion to what you think the majority opinion is. You say, therefore, if you go with the herd mentality, they must be wrong. This is often the case, but sometimes the contrarian view is wrong. It takes that guts, though, to sometimes, if you're a skeptic or a contrarian, to go and look at the opposite side and say, okay, that was wrong or that was wrong, but I might still be being influenced by my own ideology. Also, there's the scientific approach, which is the most modern view, which is still not filtered through to the majority of the population, is that you assume that whatever you believe it is wrong, and that if it's wrong, then you can only have that sort of accurate sense of things as being that I'm almost right.